Joining us on the Heister Automotive Group hotline, Darren Gant, Panthers.com. Have you protected your kneecaps, Darren? Dan Campbell's in town, ready for some preseason action. Please tell me your limbs are protected from him ripping them off and eating them.
Yeah, I'm doing my best to keep my distance from Dan Campbell. Here's the thing about the Lions rolling in here. They were complaining about how cold it was when they were here recently in December. For the record, coldest game in Bank of America Stadium history. It's probably going to be the hottest game in Bank of America Stadium history Friday night. So I fully anticipate those guys complaining about the weather more than anything else.
Fantastic. All right. Let's
solve some of our debates here, Darren. We have preseason takes and thoughts, and you've covered, I think, every Panthers preseason game ever. So you're qualified.
There's been a lot.
Yeah. What do you make of the preseason in general, and what a team can or can't get out of it?
Nothing much. I think it's okay to look at individual guys and kind of the process people go through. But if you start getting hung up on results, I remember after the 2001 season when they won the opener and then lost 15 straight, John Fox comes in, new start, new enthusiasm, all this kind of stuff, and they lose their first 3 preseason games that year. And I remember hitting him with, the Carolina Panthers haven't won a game of any kind in 341 days. In 348 days, in 355 days. And John was like, you realize how ridiculous that is, right? So, and it is, to think of it, in terms of like the Ravens' epic winning streak, which Washington overturned the other night. And by the way, shake hands with Josh Harris, everybody. I don't know. We make too much of the results and not enough of the individual things. All that's important really out of this offseason is, how's Bryce look? And they're not putting him out there in positions to do a whole lot or to have a lot happen to him negatively, because they really want to protect him. And I think that's been the theme of the offseason. They've protected him with coaches. They've protected him with personnel. And they've protected him with preseason play calling. So we kind of walk into the regular season not really knowing exactly what to expect.
The other issue too, Darren, is before we even get to Bryce Young, a lot of people are hurt. The wide receiver room is kind of banged up. Offensive line has been a mess. There's a separate conversation about Ike Ekwonu we'll get to in a second, but they don't have their full complement of offensive linemen. That's what got everybody optimistic at the end of last year. They were healthy and they looked like a capable offensive line. That hasn't been the case in the preseason. How much of this is like legitimate guys are hurt, and how much of it is, look, we're not going to waste any time in the preseason, get more wear on those times?
I think a lot of it is, and I'll tell you, not to violate anybody's HIPAA rights or anything like that, but for all those injuries, really the only guy who we know right now is not going to play against Atlanta is Austin Corbett, who's coming off the ACL. All this other stuff is the kind of dings that you get in training camp. And listen, they've been getting after it pretty hard. Oddly enough, we came home from Spartanburg and it got hotter, which I'm not in favor of in any way, shape, or form.
It got hotter than Spartanburg?
Yeah, it was warm in Spartanburg, but it's been sweltering here in Mayberry lately.
Yikes.
So it's not been great. And they've been getting after it. Probably 2 of the hardest practices, we've seen in this week. And there's some guys dinged up, but nothing that's kind of acute or worrisome from the Atlanta standpoint. Everybody else has a chance to be available for that game.
Okay. So let's talk about the guy who is healthy, and we've seen him have a little bit of a rough go on the offensive line. Ike Ekwonu, NC State product, top pick in last year's draft or 2 years ago. So, look, Giglio and I have talked about this. We talked about it earlier in the week. There's some of the stuff that he does well, and there's some of the stuff he doesn't do well, and you can kind of compensate from that. What have you seen so far from Ekwonu that would lead you to believe that it's going to be fine at the end of the day?
I guess the answer is weeks 3 through 13 last year, because he came out of the chute with Myles Garrett and Kayvon Thibodeau a year ago, gave up 3 sacks in the first 2 games, and then goes 10 weeks without giving one up. So, there's a lot to go into that. I think Ike benefited last year from the midseason coaching change and Steve Wilkes taking the playbook back to 1942. Okay. It was running 50 times a game was conducive to Ike Ekwonu's success as a pass protector. So, because it reduced the number of times he had to. But I think he's got it in him. And I think more than anything else, I understand the concern when you draft a guy that high. And we tend to, left tackles are like cornerbacks. We see them when they mess up. We don't tend to see them when they make a good play. And Icky is talented. We know that. Icky's big and strong and loves to run block and road grade people and all that fun football talk stuff. But Icky also has really, honestly, one of the 3 or 4 best offensive line coaches in the NFL in James Campen. And because Campen is not freaking out about this, I'm kind of inclined to not freak out about it also, because that guy's earned the benefit of the doubt. He made a career for himself in Green Bay by taking a bunch of 4th, 5th, 6th round picks and turn them into Pro Bowlers. And obviously having Favre and Aaron Rodgers helped along that process. But Campen insists. I mean, he loved getting Icky because he had this incredible, supply of raw material with which to work and all the physical talent you'd want in the world. And he got to turn him into an NFL offensive lineman. You trust Campen in that situation. I think Hickey's going to be all right. The stuff he's getting a chance to work every day in practice against Brian Burns. This is kind of the miniature version of Julius Peppers versus Jordan Gross back in the day. Right. And so it's a little bit like that in the way of thinking that one of these guys is not just dominating the other one. When Icky gets his hands on Brian Burns stops moving forward. So when Icky is sound, when Icky is in the right places, eyes in the right place, that sack Thibodeau had the other night, he got caught with his eyes in the wrong place. He was looking inside to help Christensen with something, and the count was off by 1. So Thibodeau gets a free shot there. So that kind of stuff is going to happen. I think the nature of playing his position means that when he messes up, we all see it. But when he makes good plays, we don't all see those.
Darren, what do you think the identity of this team is going to be under Frank Reich? Because you mentioned with Wilkes, those 12 games. Hey, let's run. Let's play some defense. Let's win this thing the old-fashioned way. Yeah. What do you see as the identity of this franchise going forward under Reich?
I think it is going to be it may not be exciting necessarily from a visually appealing football. It's not going to be, Frank Reich's Buffalo Bills airing it out, running the K-gun, that kind of stuff. I think it's going to be controlled. It's going to be, lateral more than vertical. I think early on, they're going to give Bryce a chance to get the ball out quick, do the little short stuff that is efficient. I mean, it's not sexy, but I think that's what he's best at, is moving the ball around, spreading it to a bunch of different targets and kind of keeping things moving. He's not a big home run threat. This is not Justin Herbert throwing a football over a mountain or anything like that. I mean, that's not who this guy is, but what he can do is look around, make the right reads, get it off to the right people. And I mean, again, I go back to my point about protecting him with personnel. When you look at what they did this offseason, they were very deliberate to go get Miles Sanders, who can be a volume back, who can also catch, to go get Hayden Hurst, a 50-catch tight end, to give him that easy throw that Cam Newton enjoyed so often with Greg Olsen, to find a guy like Thielen who knows how to get open in short spaces. So I think they've done everything very deliberately and according to plan to make things easy for him to ease into the league. So I don't think they're going to rush ahead and skip 5 chapters of textbook now. They're kind of gradually building on what Bryce does, and they're going to let him do what he does best.
So glad Darren is joining us. We say very similar things. You just say them with a lot more polish than I do, and sometimes
that's impossible. You're a radio professional. Is this radio? What do we call this?
It's a show.
It's a show.
It's a show.
Content, Darren.
Some people,
old habits die hard.
Yeah. Some people don't love it when I try to explain things, but you do it in a much more polished way. Because I do love it. I know who I'm talking to here, but I do love the way that what they did. All of the moves this offseason, I approve of. Not that they were looking for mine, but the truth of the matter is I don't really like the Panthers. But this offseason has been very productive in my viewpoint.
Yeah, it's hard to poke holes in the theory of what's happened.
Yes,
here. I mean,
we love all of their
Right,
theories.
that's the thing.
And,
We just
what
haven't
I've seen on the
seen-
field,
We just haven't
it's
seen
like,
it yet. And that
but
gets
that's the
back to
patience. I think that's the patience.
that gets back to how do you want to go about your preseason? You know, they're playing the Lions. We were joking about this earlier in the week. Didn't the Lions go 4-0 in the preseason
year
once,
they
and
went
then they
0-16.
never won a game after that?
They did.
So, and you know, we referenced the Ravens already. They had this incredible streak. How many Super Bowls did they win along the way while they were winning those preseason games? But I will say, I think it's fair to wonder how Frank Reich is preparing Bryce Young for week 1. What exactly are we getting? And Giglio and I got into an argument about this at the beginning of the week, and then I watched Monday Night Football with Sam Howell, and I absolutely loved the way they played that first half against the Ravens. They treated it like it was a real game for Sam Howell. They had things that you would see in the regular season for him. They were not playing with kid gloves. Now, I get there's a difference between a 5th rounder that you're taking a flyer on, and we'll see where it goes, versus the top pick in the draft that you just made moves to go and get and mortgage your future to get the guy. I get there's differences in where they're picked, but I don't think there should be differences in the philosophy of getting your QB1 ready for week 1, which gets us to Friday night against the Lions. I feel like if the first 2 preseasons had gone better, we're not seeing Bryce Young for very long on Friday night. But we haven't seen really great things out of it. So what do we expect to see in terms of Bryce Young and what they have scripted for him against the Lions?
I think they're going to let him play a little bit. I think they need to get some snaps. And I've asked Frank a couple of versions of this question over the last few weeks after the first game.
I know. I'm watching the YouTube press conferences. I know when Darren's asking questions.
But it's like, Frank, where do you draw the line between I don't want to show anything versus this guy needs to have a positive result? And I think we're kind of what does Frank call it, that dynamic tension or creative tension about certain of these things. It's interesting because I do think he needs to put something out there in the streets and show people, if only to calm people down a little bit. There's some freaking out here in the streets of Charlotte about what's going on in the preseason, which kind of makes me chuckle. I mean, I tend to think, because I have the ability to take the long view on certain things, having seen it all, Icky's going to be fine. I'm not freaking out about an Icky sack in the preseason because I've seen a season's worth of work out of Icky Ekwonu. He's going to be all right. I think that Bryce is going to be all right based on what I saw out of him in Alabama and Frank's track record. And I just, it's impossible. There's a stable feeling about what's going on here right now that even if this doesn't turn into 9 or 10 wins this year, I have a hard time imagining this going really wrong just because of all the smart, stable, competent people they put in place around him. I mean, Frank Reich, Jim Colwell, Josh McCown, Thomas Brown. Somebody asked me in my mailbag, Ask the Old Guy, and if you guys would ever send a question, maybe you could get some Friend of the Mailbag merch down there.
All right, I'm down.
It's looking good. I may have to reach in the bag and model that later on. But somebody asked in the mailbag, when's the last time a number 1 pick quarterback got into this kind of situation? And I said, really, you've got to go back to Troy Aikman landing with Jimmy Johnson in Dallas or Drew Bledsoe in New England with Bill Parcells. Usually, if you've got the number 1 pick, that's not a good situation. And it's not really conducive to having lots of smart people around you to ease you into the NFL. Bryce has been fortunate. I'm just constantly amazed to walk these halls and run into Jim Caldwell every day. And it's like, this guy's just wandering around with a consultant job, no real, well-defined responsibilities. And this is a great coach. This was Peyton Manning's position coach, for God's sake. So having guys like that around just make me think it's hard for me to imagine that this is going to be a disaster.
Darren Gant, Panthers.com. We appreciate it, man. I'm finally broken up. You've been doing it for so long. I still want to say Rock Hill Herald. That's just how OG you treat.
That's fine. I made a radio reference earlier. And when's the last time you did radio? Is there still such a thing as radio?
Radio still exists.
I like listening to the radio. Mostly serious. I don't know. I'm not a big terrestrial guy anymore.
That's technically satellite. I highly recommend you go. Do you have Hulu?
Yeah.
Go look up on Vice Dark Side of the 2000s.
Oh, I saw that the other day that you told me after you told me.
And they have a 2-part episode on Howard Stern leaving for Sirius XM.
Mm-hmm.
And it refreshes your memory on a couple of things. One, morning zoo radio is off the charts problematic.
Yeah.
But also, there are no new ideas. There's no new ideas. It's just the platform that it's on, which brings us to this show.
And by the way, the next time I get the opportunity to join you guys, we'll have to break down Ahsoka.
Oh yeah, Jillian.
Because I'm not a big animated Star Wars guy.
Yeah, you didn't watch Rebels?
Yeah, I didn't follow it closely, but I was able to watch the premiere and feel like I didn't miss that much. I understand where they're going with this.
They did a really good job of bringing people into that show and what they're trying to do without you needing to do homework assignments, which I feel like a lot of Star Wars these days requires you to do homework. So thankfully for people like you, look, man, I had tween kids when Rebels was and Clone Wars was a thing. So I'm familiar with all this stuff, but I thought they did a good job with it. See, his eyes are glazed over already.
Yeah, really. I'm holding out for the all Wookiee show. That's what I want.
A very Wookiee.
Featuring Dimitri Ravanos. All right, man. We appreciate it.
See y'all.